So, icebergs are a thing on YouTube. No, not the literal ones you see floating in the North and South Poles or the one that the Titanic didn't avoid to hit, but the whole concept born out of memes that's been used to explain various subjects where the more well-known and common knowledge stuff is up at the top, where you can see it, and the deeper you go underneath the surface of that iceberg, the less known and more obscure stuff tends to be. It just so happened that I saw one of those particular iceberg tiers done in recent months for Brazilian football by a Reddit user, and it's Pietro Felix. The Reddit itself will be linked in the description, and it brought back a lot of memories. However, outside of maybe a couple of events here and there, it dawned on me that my main audience, which tends to be English speaking, for the most part, probably has zero idea about most of these events. Outside of my FM24 videos, I did make it a personal goal to start introducing my audience to certain aspects of Brazilian football that I find interesting, and that will hopefully give folks an extra bit of knowledge and interest in both my country of birth and the way we play the beautiful game. So, while I struggle with writer's block on that whole Grenal video essay I've been trying to write for the past month, I thought I'd go ahead and do a Brazilian football iceberg video using the Reddit thread I found as an inspiration for, admittedly, a lot of the topics that we're going to cover here. Those topics may vary from epic matches to unsolved cases to not so well-known tidbits. And while I'm going to be leaving some very well-known topics to our more international audience out, such as the tragic plane crash involving Chapecoense, the 1950 World Cup final loss to Uruguay, and of course, everyone's favorite, I do want to take a second to say that some of the topics we discuss are going to be serious as we get further down the tiers of the iceberg, and given the rather sinister nature of some of these topics, viewer discretion is advised. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Tier 1. Tip of the iceberg. Clube dos 13. The Clube dos 13 was an organization created in July 1987 by some of the most powerful football clubs across all of Brazil. The 13 founding members of this organization were Atlético Mineiro, Bahia, Botafogo, Corinthians, Cruzeiro, Flamengo, Fluminense, Grêmio, Internacional, Palmeiras, Santos, São Paulo, and Vasco da Gama. So, basically most of the big boys from the southern region of Brazil, with Bahia being the only exception as they're in the northeast. They became responsible for representing the interest of the most powerful football clubs of Brazil, mainly by being the ones to negotiate radio and television rights of competitions such as the Campeonato Brasileiro. Also, the Clube dos 13 was responsible for providing a unified voice in negotiations with CBF about the format of the Brazilian competitions. While they initially started at 13 clubs, they eventually did invite 7 other clubs to join them over time, while still keeping the Clube dos 13 namesake. However, the organization eventually ended up folding in 2011 due to infighting and disagreements over various matters, including how their members negotiated their respective television rights. During the years in which they were active, the Clube dos 13 organized 2 national competitions, the 1987 Copa União and the 2000 Copa João Havelange, both of which are situations that we'll cover here in due time. Pelé só jogou contra pedreiro. The phrase in question translates to Pelé only played against stonemasons, although in the English-speaking world, the more common phrase used in these situations would be that Pelé only played against farmers. A bold claim made by various people, more often of the European variety, that attempt to diminish the accomplishments of one of football's greatest players ever by claiming that his stats are inflated due to playing with amateurs. Often, it's also a claim that is made without the proper context of the era in which the king played in. So, let's give it the proper context. During the 1950s to the 1970s, the Brazilian state leagues were some of the most competitive around, and within the state of São Paulo, some of the most intense games and rivalries took place. So it's even more impressive that Pelé's Santos team was one of the most dominant clubs during that time within the state and the whole country, as the king squared off against players with whom he teamed up with for the Brazil national team, such as Gilmar, Garrincha, Djalma Santos, Mário Zagallo, Nilton Santos, and many others. But on the club level, Santos would also extend that level of dominance beyond Brazil, as they'd won 2 Copa Libertadores in a row in 1962 and 1963, plus a pair of Intercontinental Cups in those same years against Eusébio's Benfica in 1962 and Gianni Rivera's AC Milan in 1963. Additionally, between 1957 to 1974, their record against European teams across 141 games would be one of 88 wins, 25 draws, and 28 losses. Twitter user Amaneces del Futbol went even further into the research as he narrowed down Pelé's performance against some of the best European teams during that time, and across 39 games against those clubs listed, Pelé scored 47 goals, giving him a goal per game ratio of 1.21, which matches quite closely with his goal per game ratio across matches played solely against the clubs in the state of São Paulo. And keep in mind the international tournaments in which Pelé played with the Brazilian national team, which just happened to win 3 World Cups with him as the star player of those teams. So in conclusion, historical context is key when talking about Pelé's career, and if trolls will continue to insist that he played with farmers, then my argument is that the man known as the King of Football made everyone, from his fellow Brazilian national team members to the European elites like Yashin, Beckenbauer, Bobby Charlton, and more, look like farmers. YouTuber sponsors Botafogo. In late 2017, Rio de Janeiro club Botafogo made history by becoming the first professional football club in the world to have a YouTube star among their shirt sponsors, by reaching a one-off agreement with Brazilian influencer Felipe Neto and his food brand Netos. At the time, Felipe Neto had about 16 million subscribers on YouTube and was among the top 50 most subscribed accounts on the platform. For context, he now has over 46 million subscribers and is within the top 100 most subscribed accounts on YouTube on a worldwide scale, ranking as the 3rd most subscribed Brazilian on YouTube. Additionally, in 2020, he was included on Time's list of 100 most influential people in the world. As a lifelong fan of the club, Felipe Neto was thrilled to be a part of this collaboration, and for Botafogo, this was a commercial partnership meant to help them attract more fans on social media. The partnership ended up being a resounding success, as it helped Botafogo's social media following and revenue increase through the remainder of the 2017 calendar year, and Felipe Neto's announcement video of the partnership has over 1.7 million views on YouTube. Due to its success, Netos ended up getting 2 locations inside a Botafogo stadium to sell their food, and their partnership was eventually extended. While the sponsorship did come to an end after the 2018 season, it ended up being a mutually beneficial deal for both parties. Ibis Sport Clube. In the state of Pernambuco, Ibis Sport Clube is a regular mainstay in the 2nd division of the state championship of Pernambuco, but they're also a football club that has made their own mark in footballing history. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Ibis gained worldwide fame for its poor results on the field. Thanks to 9 consecutive defeats and then a sequence of 23 games without a win, it achieved national fame. It was 3 years and 11 months without celebrating a single victory, a record that was then included in the Guinness Book of Records. During that time, the club became well known to reporters as o pior time do mundo, the worst team in the world. That would be a moniker that their own fan base would eventually embrace as their team's nickname for marketing purposes. Yes, calling themselves the worst team in the world, going as far as naming their blackbird mascot Derrotinha, or Little Defeat for the sake of translations, they went all in on the gimmick. While they're still currently in the second tier of the Campeonato Pernambucano and still seeking accolades beyond their state, their social media presence during the pandemic grew further as their satirical style of posting brought eyes onto the club, and with it, over 300,000 followers on both Instagram and Twitter. That would eventually attract Swedish company Betsson FC to agree to a sponsorship contract with Ibis, the biggest in the club's 82-year history, and something that did help propel them to the first tier of the Campeonato Pernambucano at the end of the 2021 season. Their new sponsor also did encourage them during that time frame to shoot their shot during the Lionel Messi sweepstakes, as the club offered La Pulga a very generous 15-year-long contract with some very interesting caveats, such as a salary based on productivity, if he deserves it, that he cannot score many goals and cannot become a champion, he cannot wear the number 10 shirt, as the number is retired in honor of legendary Ibis player Mauro Shampoo, and that he must swear 3 times in front of a mirror that Pelé is much better than Maradona. It didn't quite pan out for Ibis, but you gotta give him points for effort. The goal that defied physics. In early June 1997, the Tournoi de France, or just Le Tournoi, was held across 4 different French cities in preparation for the 1998 FIFA World Cup. Along with the host in France, 3 other international teams were invited to take part in the tournament: England, Brazil, and Italy. The teams played in a round-robin style, and the one with the most points at the end would be declared the winner. In the opening game of the tournament in Lyon, France squared off against Brazil. In the 21st minute, Brazil won a free kick that was about 33.13 meters, or over 36 yards if you want to be American about it, outside of the box. At that point, Roberto Carlos decided to take the kick, and he was already developing a reputation as a free kick specialist, having scored 12 goals off dead ball situations in his club career. So, after backing up a considerable distance, he ran towards the ball and with his left foot, fired off a powerful shot that headed to the right side of the French wall of players and then gradually bent its way towards the net, nicking the far post ever slightly before going into the net, to the absolute puzzlement of keeper Fabien Barthez and everyone in attendance in Lyon. While this would not be Roberto Carlos' last free kick goal by any stretch, it would become his most famous one, as pundits stated that it defied physics. The goal would be discussed for many years, to the point where in 2010, a study published in the New Journal of Physics by French scientists suggested that the assumption that the goal was just a phenomenal fluke was wrong. They outlined all the parameters behind the goal, and there's an article on BCC that covered their findings, which will be linked below in the description. Tier 2. The Surface. The 2000 Copa João Avelange. The 2000 Campeonato Brasileiro Série A, known officially as the Copa João Avelange, was one of the 2 competitions in which the Clube dos 13 had organized across Brazilian football instead of the CBF. Much like the year in which they were founded, the Brazilian football scene was yet again facing a crisis heading into the 2000 season due to issues that had occurred in the previous year. For context, the formula of relegation of the 1999 Campeonato Brasileiro was based on the average points between 1998 and 1999. But due to a decision of the Supreme Court of Sporting Justice of removing points from São Paulo FC, who had played against Botafogo and Internacional with an irregular player, Brasilia team SCE Gama was going to end up in the Série B instead of Botafogo. Gama refused the relegation and, supported by the Distrito Federal Football Coaches Trade Union and political party PFL, they sued the CBF, requesting a return to Série A. By June 2000, the trial was not solved, and CBF could not release the 2000 Brasileirão rules. So, due to this entire mess not being resolved in the courts, the CBF made the deal with Clube dos 13 to allow them to organize that year's championship. Plus, to avoid further legal problems, the 2000 championship would encompass all 3 divisions of the Brazilian national pyramid, meaning that 116 teams were involved in that year's championship, divided in 4 different modules/divisions: blue, yellow, green, and white. How those 4 modules were determined was equally as confusing, but the whole point is, they got everybody involved, and after massive group stage games happened, 16 clubs would qualify for the final stage of the competition. The top 12 from the blue module, the top 3 from the yellow module, and 1 team from both the green and white modules. It was played in a knockout system, round of 16, quarterfinals, semifinals, and final, with 2-legged ties, with the club with the best record having the home ground in the second leg, and the away goal rule was used as a tiebreaker. The tournament would be mainly marked by the 14th seed of the tournament in yellow module runner-up Sonai Tuno taking down some of Brazilian football's biggest teams in Fluminense, Palmeiras, and Grêmio in order to make the final of the Copa João Avelange, where they would be eventually beaten by Vasco da Gama. Although the second leg in Rio de Janeiro had to be suspended due to part of Estádio São Januário's dividing wall collapsing, injuring around 115 people during the first 25 minutes of the game. A new match was scheduled for January 18, 2001 at the Maracanã, where Vasco won 3-1 in order to win the title. Brazil's 1994 World Cup tribute to Ayrton Senna. On July 17, 1994, more than 30 years ago, the Brazilian national team became 4-time World Cup champions after defeating Italy on penalty kicks. During the title celebrations, while still on the pitch, the players paid tribute to Ayrton Senna, the 3-time Formula 1 world champion, with a banner, "Senna, aceleramos juntos, o tetra é nosso." The Brazilian Formula 1 driver, who had kicked off the friendly match between Brazil and PSG in Paris on April 20th, 1994, had greeted all the players during that match and wished them all the best in the upcoming World Cup. The Seleção had also wished the same to the Brazilian driver, who was driving for the Williams-Renault team in the 1994 season. Both Senna and the Brazil national team were seeking their 4th World Championships at the time. In fact, Brazilian player Leonardo had told the media that Senna's exact words to them were, "This is our year." Unfortunately, Ayrton Senna would not win another world title, nor would he live to see the Brazilian national team conquer their 4th world title in the United States, as a tragic accident in the Imola circuit in San Marino claimed his life on May 1st, 1994. 3 days of mourning followed in Brazil after his passing, and the country was still very much recovering during the time in which the national team was taking to the pitch in America a month later. With heavy hearts, the Brazilian national team played with the same drive and determination that Senna best exemplified on the track, using that as an extra source of motivation as they advanced past the group stages with ease, battled their way past the World Cup hosts in the United States, Netherlands, Sweden, and Italy in order to etch their names in history as the first country to win 4 World Cups in the competition's history. Through the celebration, the Brazilian team didn't forget whom they were playing for, and that's when the players raised that banner on the field in Senna's honor, dedicating the World Cup victory to their fallen friend and in the process, giving the entire country a level of joy to help quell the grief they suffered not too long before that. Batalha dos Aflitos. The Batalha dos Aflitos, in English, the Battle of the Afflicted, is a name used by the Brazilian press to refer to a memorable Campeonato Brasileiro Série B playoff match played on Saturday, November 26, 2005 between Náutico and Grêmio. The name, Batalha dos Aflitos, is used in reference to Náutico Stadium, the Estádio dos Aflitos, in the city of Recife, where the match was played, and also due to the enormous tension demonstrated by both clubs during this game. With one last game to be played in the final round of Série B, Grêmio was leading the standings with 9 points, with Santa Cruz in second place with 7 points, and Náutico in third with 6 points. Portuguesa, from São Paulo, was last with only 5. The last 2 games of the qualification tournament were played simultaneously, so as Grêmio faced Náutico, Santa Cruz faced Portuguesa. For Grêmio, who were facing financial struggles at the time, a draw ensured a promotion, and a win would also win them the title. But prior to the start of the game, the visitors were drawn into a psychological tug-of-war, with mind games already in full swing before kickoff. Grêmio had arrived at Estádio dos Aflitos to a visitor's locker room that had been painted hours prior to the game, and when they attempted to leave that locker room for warm-ups, they were then locked out of accessing the stadium grounds by a locked gate. That gate was not unlocked until it was nearly time for the start of the game. The first half was a 0-0 affair that saw a controversial penalty kick be given to Náutico, but they ended up hitting the post in the attempt. With Santa Cruz leading and eventually winning their game against Portuguesa, the second half's atmosphere became more tense. It only further escalated for Grêmio as their wingback Alejandro Scalona ended up getting a red card late in the second half of the game due to a handball. With the man advantage, Náutico pushed even harder on the attack, while Grêmio tried to hold on for at least a draw. But see, this is where this game went from a tense affair to one of the most memorable battles in Brazilian football history, when late into the second half, a dubious second penalty was given against Grêmio by referee Djalma Beltrami after the ball hit the elbow of Nunes in the box. Grêmio's players immediately confronted the referee after this decision, and a tense situation turned outright volatile, as further aggressive arguing by some of the Grêmio players caused the referee to show 2 more red cards, sending off 2 additional Grêmio players. It reached the point where the military police stormed the pitch to calm things down. But as often happens when the police get involved, things got worse. Officers started shoving and yelling at Grêmio's players, both benches cleared, and the chaos stopped the match for about 25 minutes. By the time that some semblance of order had been restored, another Grêmio player had gotten red carded due to punching the ball away from the referee's hands when he was trying to set things up for the penalty kick, thus leaving Grêmio with 7 men on the pitch. Finally, all had been settled to where Náutico could finally take their penalty kick. Left wing Ademar took it, but Grêmio's goalkeeper Galato narrowly saved the penalty with his feet, sending the ball over the goal for a corner kick. Somehow, Grêmio was still alive in this game. They cleared out the corner kick, and eventual Manchester United player UNSUNG had begun a counter-attack attempt that saw him tackled by Náutico's defender Batata, who had already gotten a yellow card earlier in the game. This would be his second yellow card and an automatic red, as we now had 5 red cards in this game. That free kick would be taken very quickly, taking advantage of a momentary lapse in concentration by Náutico's defense, as Grêmio's Marcelo Costa played it to UNSUNG, who entered Náutico's area somehow untouched, and he ended up scoring an incredibly unlikely goal in the process, making it 1-0 Grêmio at the 61st minute mark of the second half, 71 seconds after Náutico's missed penalty kick. Despite the odds and being in a hostile environment, Grêmio held on to the lead for the next 8 minutes and pulled off the near impossible victory to not only punch their ticket back into Serie A, but also win the Serie B championship that year. The Batalha dos Aflitos was so memorable to Grêmio fans that a documentary was made about it in 2007, telling the story of that year's championship in focusing heavily on the 71 seconds between Náutico's second penalty and the decisive goal. Fluminense vs Italy. In the preparation for the 2014 World Cup, Italy were playing a series of friendlies in order to tune up, and surprisingly, they decided to play against Rio de Janeiro club side Fluminense in Rio de Janeiro on June 8, 2014 for their last matchup prior to the start of the competition. While the tricolor side had never played against the Italian national team up to this point, their experiences historically against Italian club sides in friendlies or official competitions was one in which they had never lost to any of them. While the first half saw both teams trade blows to end it tied at 2-2, the second half proved to be a completely different story, as the Italians ended up scoring 3 goals in 3 minutes early in the half and eventually won a commanding 5-3 game, with Ciro Immobile getting a hat-trick in it. Italy did play mostly their reserves at the time, and Fluminense was also without their star man Fred, who was going to be featuring for the Brazilian national team in the upcoming World Cup. Regardless, this is just an interesting little friendly that happened on the lead up to one of Italy's most lackluster World Cup campaigns to date, and it would mark the last year, up to the point in which this video is being made, where the Azzurri had been featured in a World Cup, as they have not made the 2018 and 2022 editions of the competition. The 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro. So, in mid-1987, the creation of the Clube dos 13 came about mainly due to their dissatisfaction with the CBF, Brazil's governing football association, as they announced that they were unable to organize the Brazilian Football Championship a mere few weeks before it was scheduled to begin, because they did not have the financial capacity to do so due to internal political disputes between President Octavio Pinto Guimarães and Vice President Nabi Abi Shadid that was crippling the confederation from within. Aggravated by this bit of incompetence and deciding to take matters into their own hands, the Clube dos 13 proceeded to organize a championship of their own. This tournament was called the Copa União, and it was run by the 16 clubs that eventually took part in it. The Clube dos 13 invited Santa Cruz, Curitiba, and Goiás to join them, and it would be a competition that was completely free from the CBF's authority. Now, the CBF initially stood by the Clube dos 13 decision to run their own tournament for the year, and that they would grant the status of the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro winners to whoever won the Copa União. However, weeks later, with the competition already underway, and under pressure from various football clubs excluded from Copa União, well, the CBF decided to put on their big boy pants and organize their own tournament comprising of 16 smaller teams across Brazil who didn't get the Copa União invite, along with creating a new set of rules in the process for the overall 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro. Under the new rules, the Copa União was rebranded as the green module of the Campeonato Brasileiro, while the other 16 teams competed in the yellow module. Ultimately, the top 2 teams from each module would face off to determine the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro champion and decide which 2 teams would represent Brazil in the 1988 Copa Libertadores. However, the new rules were never acknowledged by the Clube dos 13 and were largely ignored by most of the Brazilian media, which focused their coverage on the independent league. The heart of the controversy was that the Copa União was widely seen by Brazilian football fans as the true first division of the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro, featuring the nation's top teams competing at the highest level. This perception persisted despite the exclusion of 3 teams that had reached the knockout stage of the previous year's Campeonato Brasileiro: América Rio de Janeiro, Portuguesa, and 1986 runners-up Guarani, who were instead placed in the yellow module. Flamengo ultimately won the 1987 Copa União and were recognized by both the Clube dos 13 and the country's National Sports Council as the 1987 Brazilian champions. Still, the CBF ruled that the season would culminate in a Final 14 tournament featuring the winners and runners-up of both the green and yellow modules. But since the Clube dos 13 did not recognize the yellow module as a legitimate competition, Flamengo and Internacional refused to participate. As a result, the CBF finals were contested solely between the yellow module finalists. In their first match, held in Campinas, Sport and Guarani drew 1-1. On February 7, 1988, Sport Recife defeated Guarani 1-0 and were declared the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro champions by the CBF, with both teams securing spots in the 1988 Copa Libertadores. Needless to say, Flamengo was furious. After multiple failed attempts to be recognized as the 1987 national champions, they took their fight to the courts but lost to Sport Recife, who was declared the sole champion by a federal court ruling. For years, the Brazilian Football Confederation upheld the decision, unable to split the title. Although in 2011, Flamengo decided to try again, but this time with a twist. They understood they couldn't change that Sport Clube do Recife had been recognized as the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro champions, but they began to claim that the court ruling couldn't stop the CBF from recognizing both teams as champions due to the nature of the competitions and their circumstances in 1987. The CBF agreed and declared both Flamengo and Sport as co-champions. Sport Recife, not having any of it, took the matter back to court, arguing that the ruling was being violated. Eventually, the Brazilian federal court sided with Sport Clube do Recife, reinstating them as the sole 1987 champions, forcing the CBF to revoke its decision and recognize only Sport Recife as the legitimate winner. To this day, Flamengo are still attempting to reverse that decision, claiming that they deserve to be recognized as the 1987 Campeonato Brasileiro champions. Tier 3. The Body. Happy dos Bad Boys. In May 1995, Flamengo had the makings of a dream attacking core, as Romário had made a return to Brazil after a falling out with Johan Cruyff at Barcelona and signed with the Rubro-Negro, and the club had recently paid Palmeiras $5.5 million, one of the highest transfer fees in Brazilian football at the time, for the services of striker Edmundo. The duo had become friends over the years due to their similar party boy-like personalities, both coming from the same youth academy in Vasco da Gama, and there was a big brother-little brother relationship between Romário and the younger Edmundo. So they took the opportunity to show that partnership wouldn't just be on the pitch, as the two would go from the pitch to the recording booth. And out of that booth came Happy dos Bad Boys, the Bad Boys rap. Now, for the obvious fear of copyright troubles in this platform that may or may not come from a song that flopped harder than their Flamengo stint on the pitch in 1995, I'm going to just briefly play a couple of seconds of the two singing a few of its bars. There is zero doubt in anyone's minds that with their reputations, they were the bad boys of that entire Flamengo squad. Hell, they showcased that in full during the 1995 Copa Libertadores, as Edmundo got into a scuffle with Vélez Sarsfield defender Flávio Zandona, and getting cheap-shotted after a pair of slaps were initially exchanged, and Romário then arrived to protect his young party Padawan by hitting Zandona with a flying kick to the chest to start a Pier 6 brawl between the Brazilian and Argentinian sides. But this song, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that they did not live up to any of that, as the partnership between the two broke off after Flamengo basically screwed the pooch in multiple competitions, Edmundo leaving the club shortly thereafter and Romário being loaned out to Valencia. They'd end up having a much better stint as teammates in Vasco da Gama a few years later anyway, and to be honest, Secret Base did a pretty good video covering their relationship and all of the beef those two eventually had with one another far better than I currently could. Arur Freire. Arur Freire was a Brazilian professional footballer who played as a forward during the early 1900s. He was arguably the sport's first outstanding mixed-race player during the early amateur era of football in the country, playing for the Brazil national team along with becoming a record 9 times top scorer of the Campeonato Paulista during his years playing at the domestic level. His performances during Brazil's victory at the 1919 South American Championship, now known as Copa America, earned him the nickname of El Tigre by the Uruguayans and Argentinians due to his fearless style of play, although he was more commonly known as Freire to his fellow Brazilians. Freire was often said to be the pioneer of Jogo Bonito, or the beautiful game, a style frequently associated with Brazilian football, and despite being a shorter player at 5'7", he was known for his pace, power, and brilliant technical dribbling. But even the man's incredible talent in being born into an affluent family wasn't enough to avoid certain challenges. His Afro-Brazilian origins meant he faced his fair share of discrimination from Brazilian elites at a time where the country's racism was unfortunately very strong. As someone of mixed race due to his German father and Brazilian mother, it led him to not embrace his culture to an extreme, as he even used tactics to appear more white by dressing, acting, and behaving like many other white players. At the time, many black players in Brazil would put flour or rice powder on their faces to appear whiter, and in Friedenreich's case, he would also spend a lot of time straightening his hair before games to complete that look with brilliantine. Yet, even that would not be enough, as Freire and other black players would be banned from participating in the 1921 South American Championship hosted by Argentina after a suggestion from the then president of Brazil, Epitácio Pessoa. It would cost Brazil greatly, as they only managed to win 1 out of the 3 games in that tournament's format. Arur Freire would play until the mid-1930s before retiring from the sport at age 43, as he was against the professionalization of football in the country. By the time that he had retired, he was said to have scored a supposed 1,329 goals in 1,239 matches that he had played. Unfortunately, the exact number of goals that Freire scored is unknown due to the lack of documentation. Various Brazilian journalists have attempted to figure out Friedenreich's exact goal tally based on information published in newspapers, only to arrive at different conclusions, and the exact count is still a disputed topic to this day. Regardless of his goal count, Freire was one of Brazil's first iconic players, and while he passed away at age 77 on September 6, 1969, he's still remembered in Brazilian lore via a major park and street named after him in São Paulo, and in Rio de Janeiro, where there is a school with his name located within the sports complex of the Maracanã, near the main entrance of the ground. São Caetano's 2002 Copa Libertadores run. São Caetano Futebol Clube, formerly known as Associação Desportiva São Caetano, is a Brazilian professional football club based in São Caetano do Sul, São Paulo, founded in December 1989. Currently, they compete in the Campeonato Paulista Série A3, the 3rd tier of the São Paulo State Football League. They've had quite a falling off in recent years, but in the late 90s and heading into the 2000s, they were Brazil's big Cinderella story, as they climbed up the tiers of Brazilian football and arrived at the top tier of Brazilian football by 2000. In the unique format of that year's competition, the 2000 Copa João Avelange, São Caetano went on a Cinderella-like run through the modules and reached the final, where they were eventually bested by Vasco da Gama. But this would not stop them, as they proceeded to get first place in the first stage of the 2001 Campeonato Brasileiro and once again made the final of it, this time losing in a 2-legged series against Atlético Paranaense. But the biggest thing that those runs in the Brazilian domestic league did for São Caetano was to allow them entry into the Copa Libertadores. While the 2001 edition saw them fall in the round of 16 against Palmeiras, the 2002 run would be etched in the Brazilian footballing lore as the team in the ABC region of the state of São Paulo topped their group in the 2002 Copa Libertadores, then knocked out Universidade Católica in the round of 16 on penalty kicks to redeem themselves from their exit in the 2001 edition to Palmeiras. In the quarterfinals, they'd be matched up against 5-time Copa Libertadores champions Peñarol from Uruguay, and their 2-1 comeback win in the second leg at Estádio Centenário to tie the aggregate had to be settled in penalty kicks, where they would once again emerge victorious. Then, they would defeat Club América, yes, that Club América in the semifinals 3-1 on aggregate, taking them to an unprecedented Copa Libertadores finals appearance, where they'd be facing Paraguayan side Club Olimpia. São Caetano won the first leg in Asunción 1-0, but in the second leg at the Estádio do Pacaembu, Olimpia turned it around by winning it 2-1 to tie up the aggregate and sent the game into a penalty shootout. Unlike their previous games during the knockout round, it was not meant to be for São Caetano, as Olimpia won the shootout 4-2 and their third Copa Libertadores trophy. But despite finishing as runner-ups, São Caetano earned the respect of the nation, and their run to the Libertadores final was seen as an extreme fairy tale story. While their current day status has seen São Caetano fall from the heights they once achieved to the lower depths of the São Paulo State Championship tiers, the fact that a non-traditional powerhouse club in the state of São Paulo was nearly able to conquer the continent's biggest competition is something in which we will never forget. Rogério Ceni almost signs for Arsenal. Rogério Ceni is considered to be one of the greatest Brazilian goalkeepers of all time, not just for his shot-stopping skills and trophy-laden career, but also for his exceptional ability as a dead ball specialist. Over his 25-year career, Ceni scored 103 goals, making him the highest-scoring goalkeeper in football history. He spent his entire playing career in the Brazilian leagues, primarily with São Paulo Futebol Clube, where he became one of the club's most iconic figures. But in 2001, it was said that English side Arsenal and their manager Arsene Wenger had an interest in bringing the Brazilian keeper in to compete for the starting job against the Gunners' longtime veteran David Seaman. During the 2001 season, São Paulo FC received a document containing an official proposal from Arsenal to sign the player. The document was stamped by the company Tango Sports Marketing, which belonged to Rogério's manager, Oliveira Jr. However, both the English club and Oliveira Jr. denied having made the proposal. That led to São Paulo FC president Paulo Amaral suspending Rogério Ceni for 29 days, accusing him of forging the document in order to get a pay raise, as the two sides had been in contract negotiations leading up to this point. Because of this situation with the club's president, newspapers at the time even reported that the final of the 2001 Copa dos Campeões game against Flamengo would be Rogério's last match in the club's shirt. But in the end, Rogério Ceni came to an understanding with Amaral and the São Paulo management. He was reintegrated into the team, and he signed a new deal that gave him a larger wage to see him remain at the club for many more years to come. The situation had been reported heavily at the time, but it was brought back into the limelight in 2006 by journalist Mélie Lacombe, who said on the TV program Arena Sport TV that Ceni had outright forged the signature from the English club in order to use it as leverage in negotiations for his new deal at that time. Given the fact that Lacombe stated this in a public television show, Ceni promptly called into the live show itself to confront her claims, and then sued Lacombe in 2007 in the civil and criminal courts. Lacombe would be promptly suspended by Rede Globo for her comments, and eventually the journalist settled the case with Ceni in 2010. Lacombe being made to pay about 60,000 reais to Ceni after the settlement was complete. Now, Ceni sticking it out with São Paulo did result in him winning a total of 25 trophies throughout his career, the aforementioned 100 plus goals as a keeper, and an eventual transition into a coaching career. But whether Arsenal's interest in him was simply in passing, or if there was a serious contract offer being made, there is a part of me that wonders if Ceni could have perhaps been the difference maker as their keeper in the 2006 Champions League final. He's definitely not getting sent off like Jens Lehmann did, at the very least. Cala a boca, Galvão. Carlos Eduardo dos Santos Galvão Bueno, or Galvão Bueno, is a well-known and notorious sportscaster in Brazil who has been the voice of many of Brazil's triumphs and tribulations over the years, being the lead announcer for Brazil national football team matches, key Brazilian football championship matches, top sporting events, and Formula 1 races. During the 2010 FIFA World Cup's opening ceremony and its first few games, Galvão Bueno, the host and commentator for Rede Globo's national broadcast of that World Cup, was met with criticism from Brazilian viewers due to the fact that he would simply just not shut up for a minute during the entirety of the ceremony. So, in typical fashion, Brazilians took to the internet and the phrase "Cala a boca, Galvão," which translates to "Shut up, Galvão," started to spread and it ended up going viral in the process. So the foreigners saw the trending phrase and most of them asked the most obvious question that you can ask in this situation. Who the f*** is Galvão? And that, my friends, is when us Brazilians just venting about our country's annoying announcer turned into one of the greatest inside jokes that Brazil could possibly give to the world. The phrase was further spread through social media. There was an elaborate hoax claiming that it was a movement to save a Brazilian bird on the verge of extinction, mostly because of the similarity between the words Galvão and Gavião, which is the Portuguese word for hawk. There was a fake Twitter account named Galvão Institute that was set up as a joke for non-Portuguese speakers to repeat the sentence "Cala a boca, Galvão," claiming that 10 US cents would be donated to save the bird each time those words were replied, to the point where even a YouTube video was uploaded in order to support said hoax. It was the gift that kept on giving, as there was also a series of Brazilian users claiming that it was a new Lady Gaga song. Famous author Paulo Coelho claimed that "Cala a boca, Galvão" was a homeopathic medicine known as the Silentium galvanus, making a reference for the commentator to stay quiet, and it was an expression that spread like wildfire, topping expressions related to the World Cup and NBA Finals which were happening at that time, and making the news across various major worldwide news outlets in the process. Of course, the magnum opus of it all happened during Brazil's opening game against North Korea, where a banner displaying "Cala a boca, Galvão" could be seen in the first minutes of the game and was caught by the official broadcast before quickly being removed from view. As for Galvão Bueno himself, well, he appeared scared at first that maybe he'd said something offensive during the opening ceremonies, but once the meme took off, he appeared to take it in stride when asked about it during various interviews over the years. He even unveiled in one of those interviews that Brazilian F1 driver Ayrton Senna, who'd been one of his closest friends over the years, used to call him papagaio, the word for parrot in Portuguese, because Galvão was just a non-stop talker by nature, even outside his work hours. Most people may remember the 2010 FIFA World Cup mainly due to the vuvuzela sounding off every 20 seconds, but for us Brazilians, it was simply the summer of "Cala a boca, Galvão." Tier 4, Dark Waters. The day Pelé stopped the war. During the 1960s, Pelé, Pepe, Coutinho, and the rest of the Santos dominated South American football during the first half of the decade, winning 5 straight Brazilian championships, the Copa Libertadores twice, and 2 Intercontinental Cups over European heavyweights Benfica and AC Milan. But from 1966 onwards, however, continental and even domestic glory took a backseat for the Peixe. With Pelé as their star attraction, the club began pulling out of the Libertadores in order to travel the world, embarking upon tours of the United States in 1966, Sub-Saharan Africa, Italy and Germany in 1967, and Argentina in 1968, where they participated in a pentagonal tournament in Boca Juniors' legendary La Bombonera Stadium that also included Benfica, River Plate, and Uruguay's Nacional. Almost nothing and nowhere was off limits for Santos in their efforts to squeeze every cent out of their star-studded side. During that time, Santos and their star embarked on a money-making African football tour. The itinerary included exhibition matches in the Congo, Nigeria, Mozambique, Ghana, and Algeria. The stop in Nigeria is the most infamous of the bunch, as the story behind it indicates that Pelé and Santos are often credited with temporarily causing Nigeria's 2 warring factions in the Nigerian Civil War at the time to agree to a 48-hour ceasefire, so that they could watch Santos play against the Nigerian national team. It's a story that's been often romanticized, and there have been several versions of it around the internet and news outlets. To this day, Santos' official website insists that the region's military governor Samuel Ogbemudia decreed a local holiday and opened up the bridge that connected Benin with Biafra so that both sides of the Nigerian Civil War divide could witness Santos' 2-1 victory over Nigeria in front of a crowd of 25,000 spectators. In fact, Pelé's own retelling of the story in his autobiography from the mid-2000s, as well as a 2011 interview with CNN, has certainly made the ceasefire story believable to many who have heard it. I mean, considering the amount of sporting icons in our time, if anyone could possibly cause a country torn by civil war to call a ceasefire for the sake of watching their national team play against him, it was Pelé. However, thanks to the investigative work of Olaojo Ayegbayo, a Nigerian researcher from England's University of Huddersfield, new questions have emerged about the truth behind Pelé's peacemaking efforts. Ayegbayo's research in 2015 revealed that there were no mentions of a civil war ceasefire for a Santos match in the 1969 editions of Nigeria's two major newspapers at the time, the Nigerian Daily Times and the Nigerian Observer. Both papers extensively covered Santos' two matches in Nigeria, and neither made any mention of a ceasefire agreement occurring during the time that those games were played. Ayegbayo also brought forth context that debunked Santos' own story about the bridge connecting Benin with Biafra being opened so that both sides of the civil war could watch the game itself. There was no doubt that Santos' determination to milk Pelé's fame and talent for every penny possible in those games in Nigeria did happen in front of sold-out crowds. It's just that not even the greatest footballer of all time could help quell the wounds of a major conflict and bring in a short-lived peace in the process. Guarani goes viral in Asia. Guarani Futebol Clube is a football club in the city of Campinas, São Paulo, and they hold the distinction of being the only club not based in a state capital or coastal city to have won the top tier of the Brazilian Championship, having done so in 1978. They are currently a mainstay in the Campeonato Brasileiro Série B, having survived a financial crisis in the early 2010s to get themselves back to the second tier of Brazilian football and stay there consistently at least. But in recent months, there have been far more eyeballs on the countryside club than anybody would expect, and that's due to a pair of unlikely sources. Back in October 2023, pictures surfaced from Japanese idol group Niziu's Ryo Hanabashi wearing a retro Guarani shirt all over their social media, and after it was picked up on by Guarani's social media team, it took on a life on its own, as not long after that, Gao of K-pop group IVE posted a photo of herself wearing a different retro Guarani kit from the 1990s era. Due to these events, the club's image simply soared among East Asia, especially with K-pop stans who promptly went to work on making unofficial versions of the Guarani kit in various colors that were reproduced and worn. That led Guarani's marketing team to create a new line of shirts that had a casual style with references to Asian culture. Their idea was to take advantage of the engagement generated by K-pop artists and their fans to expand the team's market outside of Brazil. Many questions have arisen as to how exactly these famous artists got their hands on the retro kits in question, but the explanation most likely lies on when Guarani flew out for an international tour of Japan to play against Verdy Kawasaki and Kashima Antlers in the 1990s. The new style shirts from Guarani would eventually arrive in mid-June 2024, just in time for Brazil's Valentine's Day, which happens in June for us, not February. The timing also coincided with Ivy coming to São Paulo for a concert during that same time frame, although the K-pop group did not, unfortunately, wear them during the concert at any point. Abel Ferreira fez pacto. Abel Ferreira is a Portuguese former player turned manager who has been the current manager of Palmeiras since November 2020, taking over for Vanderlei Luxemburgo after his sacking in October in order to right the ship for Palmeiras' domestic campaign in the Campeonato Brasileiro and their cup competitions. Within his first 6 months on the job, Abel Ferreira proceeded to win the 2020 Copa Libertadores against Santos, then shortly followed that with a Copa do Brasil win against Grêmio. As of now, and being nearly 4 years into the job, Palmeiras has won a total of 10 trophies during Abel Ferreira's stint as manager, tying him for the club record with Osvaldo Brandão. But it's not just the fact that he has been winning plenty of silverware that haunts a lot of opposing fan bases. It's how he has done it during his stint as the Palmeiras manager. Since joining the club, Palmeiras has staged a remarkable 21 comeback victories over the past 4 years, a testament to his unique blend of fiery passion and composed strategy. So it gradually became a thing that, due to the way Palmeiras has kept winning titles and making these sorts of comebacks, that Abel Ferreira made some sort of supernatural pact to get all of these things to fall in place.
The devil! The devil! Oh, yeah!
This bit of discourse did not take long to turn into various memes being made with photos of the manager alluding to witchcraft and pacts with the unknown, or as the now infamous phrase goes, Abel Ferreira fez pacto, or in English, Abel Ferreira made a pact. And while this so-called pact hasn't quite worked out as well this year as in previous years, it still doesn't change the fact those memes are going to continue for at least a while, as the manager signed an extension with the club until the end of 2025, where he will be coaching Palmeiras in the 2025 FIFA Club World Cup, which is now the only major trophy left for him to win with the Alviverde. Heleno de Freitas. During the 1940s, before Pelé and Garrincha arrived on the scene to put Brazilian football on their back and into the worldwide stage, there was arguably no better striker in the country than Botafogo's Heleno de Freitas. Over his years with Botafogo and short stints with Boca Juniors, Atlético Junior, Vasco da Gama, Santos, and América RG, he scored 244 goals in 292 games, scored 19 goals in his 18 appearances for the Brazilian national team, and just so happened to be one of the most polarizing figures during his time. Heleno's good looks and ability on the pitch as a striker, along with his fiery temper and competitive streak, made him beloved by Botafogo fans but loathed by pretty much every other fan base in the state of Rio de Janeiro. However, the man was most known for his off-field antics, as he was known to be a notorious womanizer who would often stay out all night and spend the evenings in ballrooms, excessively smoking, drinking, and gambling that led into a darker path as Heleno developed an ether addiction, and combined with his womanizing ways, it eventually led him to contracting syphilis. While Heleno eventually was able to achieve his dream of playing in the Maracanã before his career ended in 1951 with América RJ, all of the off-field issues gradually caught up with him. His wife left him and married his best friend. His syphilis went untreated and further drove him into madness, leading him to spend the last few years of his life in a hospice, where he eventually passed away from the disease on November 8, 1959. He was 39 years old. Heleno's legacy in Brazilian football is a complicated one. He was one of the most talented players during his time, but he was also one of the most unlucky, as Botafogo failed to capitalize on the striker's talents and did not win a Campeonato Carioca during his stint with the club. Additionally, his time with the Brazilian national team was also marred by a lack of luck, as his reputation kept him from getting called up for the 1950 FIFA World Cup in Brazil, and prior to that, the cancellation of the 1946 World Cup due to the Second World War meant that he could not represent his country at the height of his playing days. These reasons eventually led Heleno to be later nicknamed the Cursed Prince, paving the way for legends of the game but never quite achieving those same heights himself. His story is very much remembered in Brazil though, as a biography of Heleno was published by Marcos Eduardo Neves in 2006, titled Nunca Houve Homem Como Heleno. The biography would be used as the main source for an eventual feature film named Heleno in March 2012, with famous Brazilian actor Rodrigo Santoro of 300, Lost, and Westworld fame playing the role of Heleno de Freitas, something that eventually earned him and the film certain nominations and wins across various Latin American film festivals. Tier 5. The Abyss. The Whistle Mafia. The Máfia do Apito, literally translated as the Whistle Mafia, or sometimes referred to as the Escândalo do Apito, was the name given by the Brazilian press to a football match-fixing scandal reported on by journalist André Rizek in the cover story of the September 23, 2005 edition of Veja magazine. It involved referees who were found to have manipulated the outcomes of several football matches in Brazil's top domestic leagues, particularly the Campeonato Brasileiro Série A. The Veja article unveiled the match-fixing scheme involving referees Edilson Pereira de Carvalho and Paulo José Danilon, both members of the São Paulo Football Federation. Telephone conversations recorded by the public prosecutor's office and the federal police revealed the existence of the scheme in which the referees used their influence to make biased and questionable decisions, such as awarding penalties, giving red cards, or making dubious offside calls that would skew the results in favor of a criminal syndicate that was spending up to 200,000 Brazilian reais on bets in illegal sites, while the referees were getting about 10 to 15k per fixed match. Carvalho was connected to the betting syndicate by businessman Naguib Fayad, who acted as the key middleman who orchestrated the manipulation of results, facilitating the bribes to Carvalho in exchange for manipulating match results to favor the syndicate's bets. It would be a scheme that kept on going seamlessly until Veja magazine unveiled it after their investigation brought the scandal to light. In light of the match-fixing revelations, the CBF made the unprecedented decision to annul 11 matches from the 2005 Campeonato Brasileiro Série A that Carvalho had officiated, ordering them to be replayed even though the referee claimed he did not fix all 11 matches. This decision caused an uproar due to it directly affecting the league standings and, ultimately, the championship race. One of the main beneficiaries of the replayed matches was Corinthians, who gained crucial points from the replays and went on to win the 2005 Serie A title by a 3-point differential. Internacional, the eventual runner-up of that year's competition, protested the decision, arguing that they would have won the championship without the interference of the match-fixing scandal and the subsequent replays. The scandal raised broader concerns about corruption in Brazilian football and the governance of the sport. Carvalho was banned from officiating and faced criminal charges. Other referees were investigated as well, but none were found to have been as deeply involved in match-fixing as Carvalho, and the CBF was heavily criticized for its handling of the situation due to their lack of oversight and prevention that caused the issue in the first place, and that they prioritized protecting the image of the league over ensuring fairness for all teams in its controversial decision to annul and replay the 11 games refereed by Carvalho. The Whistle Mafia situation also led to increased scrutiny of refereeing practices and prompted reforms aimed at improving transparency to prevent similar incidents in the future. But despite these efforts, the 2005 Campeonato Brasileiro remains one of the most controversial in Brazilian football history, with many fans questioning the fairness of the title due to the scandal and its impact on the season's outcome. NieR's accident. NieR Augusto de Souza, known simply as NieR, was born on April 2, 1971, and grew up in Vila Ege, in the north zone of the São Paulo capital. Fatherless since the age of 8, NieR and his brothers had to start working to help support the family. He studied in the morning, worked at night, and played futsal for a fee in Vila Mariana, for Colégio Valak, with which he was champion in intercollegiate tournaments. Eventually, NieR found his way into the youth academy of Portuguesa after having a nightmare 2-month stint in the youth program of São Paulo FC. For 3 years, NieR trained with the senior team, but still played for the youth team. He was one of the key figures in Portuguesa's first Copinha title win in 1991, ultimately being voted the best player in the competition. NieR would make his professional debut on October 19, 1989 in a 2-1 losing effort to Grêmio, but from there, he would end up scoring 38 goals in 101 appearances for Portuguesa while being their main man in the midfield. His talent would be enough to earn him a call-up to the Seleção at age 20, where he had 2 international appearances with Brazil's national team in 1991. During his Portuguesa stint, He was also loaned down to Grêmio in early 1993 and Vasco da Gama in 1994, helping both clubs in short loan stints win their respective state titles. But it was during his loan stint with Vasco da Gama where a tale of a player with the world at his feet turned tragic. On April 19, 1994, NieR was returning from São Paulo back to Rio de Janeiro with his friend Otto Gomes Miranda, driving him back in NieR's car in the early morning hours, while NieR was asleep in the passenger seat. It had been a busy but fulfilling weekend for NieR, who'd come back to São Paulo over the weekend to meet with Portuguesa and Stuttgart officials about a future transfer to the German club, and then he had spent the weekend with his family. It was around 5:15 in the morning where their car lost control and crashed into a tree at Borges de Medeiros Avenue, in the Lagoa Rodrigo de Freitas district. According to the police's investigation into the accident, it was concluded that the car was in 5th gear at high speed when it struck the tree and that Otto had fallen asleep at the wheel, thus causing the crash itself. The crash caused NieR to hit his head on the roof of the car and for him to be strangled by the car's seatbelt. His cause of death was officially ruled to be asphyxiation due to damage to the larynx and a bruised neck. NieR was 23 years old at the time of his passing, being survived by his wife and 3 children. For Brazil, it was a shocking death of a player who had all of the potential in the world to become one of the greats, as he had drawn earlier comparisons to the king himself, Pelé, and posthumously to current Brazilian great Neymar. The Fonte Nova collapse. Estádio Octávio Mangabeira, otherwise known as Estádio Fonte Nova, was a stadium in the city of Salvador, which is in the state of Bahia. The stadium was owned by the Bahia government and was the home stadium of both Esporte Clube Bahia and Esporte Clube Vitória, the 2 main powerhouse teams in the state of Bahia, as the Bavi is the biggest football derby in the state and one of the biggest in the entirety of Brazil, going as far back as 1932 when the clubs first played one another. Built during the 1950s, the Fonte Nova bore witness to various Bavi Clássicos and had hosted major events over the years, such as famous Brazilian singer Ivete Sangalo's 10-year anniversary concert. However, the stadium had not undergone significant renovation or modernization during the time after its construction. This would have eventual dire consequences on November 25, 2007. Over 60,000 people were packing the Fonte Nova in order to watch a crucial game between Bahia against Vila Nova in the Campeonato Brasileiro Série C. It was Bahia's last home game of the season, and despite being in the 3rd tier of Brazilian football, they still averaged over 40,000 people per match, beating out some of the biggest clubs in the country on that marker. A result of any kind against Vila Nova that wasn't a loss would guarantee Bahia's return to Série B after a fall from grace over the previous 10 years that saw them go from consistent Série A performers to the dredges of Série C, in which they had been in since 2005. The game ended 0-0, and Bahia got the result they had been looking for, as their fans celebrated the club's promotion to Série B by storming the pitch if they were close enough to get to it, and jumping up and down in pure joy for those in the upper stands. That was when a section of the stadium's highest terraces collapsed, as a hole opened up in the concrete structure, causing around 8 people to fall approximately 20 meters through it to the lower stands. 7 people lost their lives from that fall, around 40 people were injured. Many didn't realize that the section of bleachers had given way as they invaded the field in celebration. This was one of the biggest Brazilian football tragedies on record. The game between Bahia and Vila Nova would be the last game ever played at the Fonte Nova, as Jacques Wagner, the governor of the state of Bahia at the time, ordered the stadium to be closed shortly after the incident, and eventually, the Estádio Fonte Nova would be demolished, and after cleanup, Arena Fonte Nova was built in its place as Bahia's new home, opening on April 7, 2013. The Elisa Samudio case. Elisa Silva Samudio was a former model who had moved to the capital of São Paulo at the age of 18 after a tumultuous childhood to become a model, participating in various fashion shows and editorials once she broke into the industry. During the late 2000s, her line of work and her social circles eventually led her to meeting a certain footballer, then Flamengo goalkeeper Bruno Fernandes de Souza. Goalkeeper Bruno had risen through the ranks, starting with Atlético Mineiro before making a move to Corinthians and eventually being loaned out to and bought by Flamengo, where he would win 3 Campeonato Cariocas and the 2009 Campeonato Brasileiro with the Rubro Negro. He had even scored a pair of goals for the club off set-piece situations. Even as a married man, Bruno had a penchant for partying outside of the field. He claimed to have met Elisa in 2009 at a barbecue and that he had hooked up with her during it, in which their use of protection had broken during the encounter. Other sources, however, claimed that they had met as early as 2008. Regardless of when they met, the two had begun to see each other, and Bruno had even gone as far as swearing that he would leave his own wife to be with Elisa. But that dynamic drastically changed when Elisa Samudio announced that she was pregnant with Bruno's child and refused to have an abortion. Bruno ended their affair shortly after that. Elisa publicly stated that Bruno had threatened her multiple times in the aftermath of him ending their affair, even claiming he tried to force her to take abortion pills. In October 2009, she filed a police report accusing Bruno of kidnapping and assault, but the case did not gain much attention at the time. Samudio's child was born on February 10, 2010, in São Paulo, where Elisa was living at a friend's house since discovering her pregnancy. Bruno refused to acknowledge paternity, accusing her of trying to trap him due to the fact he had money as a footballer. Elisa filed a paternity claim after arriving to live with her newborn son in the Rio de Janeiro capital. She started demanding child support and denounced him for assault, causing Bruno to be indicted. Things would take a dark turn within the following months, as on May 10, 2010, Elisa went to Bruno's farm in Esmeraldas, Minas Gerais at his request, as he was seemingly willing to negotiate a settlement with her regarding the paternity of the child, who had been named Bruninho. It would be the last time that Elisa Samudio would be seen or heard from. After her disappearance, suspicions quickly fell on Bruno and his associates, given that the last place she was seen had been at his farm. Bruno claimed that she left the farm of her own accord and that she abandoned her child with a common colleague of the former couple. But after an investigation by local police, Bruno was declared an official suspect on June 26, 2010, and Flamengo announced that the club has suspended Bruno's contract as a result of the investigation during the following month. Witnesses gradually came forward, including Bruno's cousin, who confessed to his part in what was a heinous, vile crime. According to testimony, Elisa was taken to a different area of Bruno's ranch in Esmeraldas, Minas Gerais, where she was kidnapped and held captive for a month. There, she was severely beaten and eventually strangled to death. Her body was then dismembered, and parts were allegedly fed to dogs. While Bruno was not directly involved in those acts, he had various accomplices and is said to have given the orders to those who were involved from the kidnapping stage to the cover-up of it. The accomplices were his closest friend Luiz Henrique Romão, known as Macarrão, former police officer Marcos Aparecido dos Santos, known as Bola, Bruno's cousins Jorge Luiz Rosa and Sérgio Rosa Salles, Alson de Freitas, known as Neném, his wife Daiane Rodrigues do Carmo Souza, his mistress Fernanda Gomes de Castro, Elenilson Vitor da Silva e Emerson Marques de Souza. Their trials in the Elisa Samudio case began in 2012, and while there was a retrial in Bruno's case specifically, on March 8, 2013, Bruno would be found guilty of ordering Elisa Samudio's murder, hiding the body, and kidnapping his baby son, and was only sentenced to 22 years in prison for it. In February 2017, Bruno was released pending an appeal of his sentence and had gotten to the point where he'd even signed a contract to start playing football again with Boa Esporte Clube. Multiple sponsors of the club immediately pulled out after said signing. In April 2017, Brazil's Supreme Court ordered his rearrest after the review of his appeal. But then, in July 2019, he was released to serve partial house arrest, being able to work or train in the day while having to return to his house for the night for the remainder of his sentence. Something in which Bruno has used to attempt to reintegrate himself by playing football in lower league and amateur teams ever since. Elisa Samujo's body was never found. Folks, that is gonna do it for now. Brazilian football as a whole has a lot of these stories, from the whimsical to the downright disturbing, and I hope that I was able to tell these stories beyond just the Portuguese-speaking bubble in which a lot of them tend to be behind. If you managed to make it this far into the video, thank you. I know that it's a lot to unpack, but to be honest, I haven't even scratched the surface just yet. So if you want another one of these videos, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Take care of yourselves. Ciao.